And Adam Crichton is the economics editor at the Australian newspaper. And Andrew Stone is with me here in the studio, former chief economist to the Prime Minister. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
Good to have you here. I'm interested to get your take on rate cuts here, because we're getting to a stage that is unprecedented in this country. Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe is expected to cut official interest rates again next week in order to combat a surprise economic slowdown. Now, he briefed the Armidale Business Chamber last night.
It's nevertheless likely that an extended period of low interest rates will be required in Australia to make progress in reducing unemployment and achieving more assured progress towards the inflation target. The board is prepared to ease monetary policy further if needed.
Andrew Stone, once rates get below that 1%, don't they become almost academic in stimulating the things that Philip Lowe just mentioned there?
Absolutely. I think the Reserve Bank actually has made a serious mistake in the last two rate cuts. It shouldn't have done those. In fact, unfortunately, it shouldn't have made the rate cuts that it made, the prior ones that it made in 2016, when it cut the cash rate from 2% to 1.5%. It is true that the economy has been fairly slow over the last year, but as Dr. Lowe pointed out in that speech, actually it was primarily slow in the second half of 2018. It actually had already picked up a bit in the first half of 2019. But more generally, in any case, the unemployment rate is 5.25%.
Yeah.
Growth is still going along. It's a bit under trend, but it's still solid. Why on earth that calls for record low interest rates? And to your point, it's extremely unlikely. I mean, which businesses are going to suddenly go out and invest because the cash rate goes to 0.75% instead of 1%? I think it's quite possible we're at that stage where the reverse is true. People keep thinking, if he keeps cutting rates, there must be something much worse going on here than I think.
The signs are wrong.
And indeed, particularly, it's often the case that you might trigger more investment at this stage, when you first start to increase rates, because then people suddenly start thinking, geez, I better get in quickly before they go up.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, Adam Crichton?
Yes, I do, actually. I thoroughly agree. I think the Reserve Bank has cut rates far too many times. It seems to be obsessed with the concern that if it doesn't cut rates, the exchange rate will appreciate. The currency is currently about 68 cents US, which is the lowest in about 10 years. I mean, I don't think it'd be such a bad thing if it was 72, 73. But in Dr. Lowe's speech, he essentially blamed the rest of the world really for these rate cuts. He said, look, we can't help it. There's zero interest rates, there's quantitative easing overseas, the Fed's about to cut, so we have to cut too. But the whole point of floating exchange rates is that you can have your own interest rates if you like to suit your own economy. And yet that doesn't seem to be what is happening here.
My small economic knowledge doesn't make me understand what happens when we start to get into negative territory. Andrew, what happens at that point?
God forbid we ever get there.
But he's indicating that we could.
Well, I find this quite rash to even begin to be talking about that. It is true. So let's say in the Reserve Bank's defence here, that part of the pressure being created here is because of the grossly problematic, grossly, I think, poor behaviour of foreign central banks, particularly in Europe, the ECB, the Bank of England, to some degree the Fed for a long period under President Obama, and they're now starting to cut rates again. When other central banks are setting their interest rates essentially at zero, or even in the case of Europe, negative levels, that does create problems, because basically they are just, it's a currency war that's going on. They're just trying to drive their currencies down to make their exports more competitive, to get a bit of extra growth. And that creates a problem for Australia. That did create a problem for Australia in the period about 2012 to 2015. So that was a period where the Reserve Banks did start to cut interest rates. They did it very reluctantly and gradually under Glenn Stevens. But that was the time when the currency was up over $1 against the US dollar, then at 90 cents for an extended period. The point was, by about mid-2015 onwards, the currency's been down in the 70-cent range. As Adam pointed out, it's actually below 70 cents at the moment. On a trade-weighted basis against other currencies, it's relatively competitive at the moment. So even though it is true that all these other central banks are basically trying to debauch their own currencies, we don't have a problem that requires us to respond. And the upshot here is we're starting to talk about emergency measures and crazy ideas about negative interest rates when the economy is performing reasonably well. There were more than 300,000 jobs added last year.
There's a great argument for keeping the glass half full as opposed to half empty.
Absolutely. And especially when the main upshot of this is likely to be to trigger to reignite increases in housing prices. That's exactly what happened in 2016, and that is really damaging.
OK, I want to talk about free trade. Our exports to Indonesia could be in jeopardy as Centre Alliance, One Nation and Green senators openly expressed their opposition to an Indonesian free trade deal. They say it's not in the national interest. Adam, is it in the national interest?
Yeah, look, I certainly think it is in the national interest. I mean, Indonesia is one of our closest neighbours. It's one of the largest countries in the world, and yet our bilateral trade relationship, they're just our 15th biggest trading partner. It's really embarrassing. We trade more with New Zealand with a population of 5 million than we do with Indonesia with a population of about 250 million.
Doesn't make sense.
So I really think that So I really think we do need to strengthen our ties with Indonesia. I think it's a big opportunity for our agricultural sector. The concern seems to be that there could be 5,000 Indonesians come here for 12 months to work. I mean, given our net overseas migration is something like 250,000, I really don't think it's such a huge issue. So I'm quite disappointed by the reaction from those vested interests that you just mentioned.
Yeah, the unions are screaming about the 5,000. It's a drop in the ocean when you look at the fact that net migration could be up into about 250,000 next year. China's ambassador to Australia has spruiked the Communist Party's miracle record on economic development, but still rejected the PM's definition of China as a developed nation. Today, Chinese economists were raving about China having the world's largest social security system and a 42-year increase in average life expectancy, but they were not having a bar of being ready to be redefined. As a matter of fact, Professor Wang Yi-wei, Andrew, started to talk in terms of, if you talk this way about us, what happens in the event of war? They didn't take it too kindly, but I guess we didn't expect much.
No, but Prime Minister Morrison is exactly right here. I think it is absolutely time that this is considered, and this all fits into the broader rearrangement of trading arrangements that is taking place, primarily being driven by President Trump, and not a moment too soon. And it's entirely appropriate, especially with a country like China. We need to understand the key point here is we're not dealing with another democratic nation here.
No.
So we need to think carefully about geostrategic implications, the much broader things than just economic implications. And when you think about that, it is crazy, actually, that given the enormous growth that's occurred in the Chinese economy for 3 decades, that we should continue to be through groups like the World Bank and so forth, for which this matters, this developing nation status matters. You can end up with Australia and America being forced to effectively give money funneled through the World Bank to China, even when China is ripping off America, for example, enormously in terms of intellectual property.
Yeah, Adam, I've only got 20 seconds for you on this, but they aren't budging, are they?
No, look, I think the Prime Minister's right. I mean, this is a country that certainly acts like a developed country. It's extending enormous loans to various countries in North Africa and, of course, the Pacific. It spends an enormous amount on its military as well. So, look, if it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's a duck. I think the Prime Minister's right. It's certainly a developed country.
Yeah, I'm glad he said what he said. Adam Crichton and Andrew Stone, thank you so much for your time this evening.